We finished our last little interview with you talking about science fictions, and then you said, and now you felt it was time to, to tackle or to look at a play, a play. So tell us what happened.
So I thought, who, what, and I don't know why I thought it should be English, and I suddenly thought maybe we should do a Shakespeare, because in a way those plays were quite possibly improvised. We know the clowns were very likely to have improvised their own stuff. Also, because there was no official rehearsal and people only learnt their lines with their cues and they never got the whole script written out for them, there was a lot of unknown going on. And also there's a sense that when they toured, the shape of the shows, the length of them varied, because, can Hamlet have always been 4 hours plus long? No. So there was a sense of freedom. Also, they were working in an empty space with a minimum of props and whatever they wore. And I thought, maybe we should do that. Now, and the other thought was, I can't afford a large cast, but can I do a play with a small cast? Now, I think the RSC possibly, or maybe they did it after me, I can't remember, but there had been a company or two doing fairly small scale doubling, touring a small cast version. And I thought, well, let's really go to town on this. And I didn't know what plays to read. I wasn't that familiar with Shakespeare at the time. I'd done very little. What had I done? I'd done a Hamlet. I think that's all I hadn't done any other Shakespeare, so I was very nervous. So I read. And of all things, this is me with my weird taste, I read Cymbeline, which is, at that time nobody did, and said it's an impossible play and it's a big mess. And I absolutely understood it, understood its structure, fell in love with it, and thought, this is it. And I worked out I could do it with 5 characters playing God knows how many. And if you know anything about the play, the last scene is when all the characters are united and there's 27 pieces of information that the audience already know, that the characters have to know one by one. And, there are about 14 or 15 people on stage at that time. So we did it with 5. And we had a very long rehearsal period. I think we had 13 weeks. And I know in week 7, we all had a week off. And I know I went to Copenhagen for the week. I'd never been. And that was wonderful. And it was good. Yeah, it was healthy. And so we were going to work with nothing. We thought we might use percussive instruments, which we eventually didn't do. But a wonderful woman who became my composer for me, shall we say, for practically everything else I ever did in the theatre, called Ilona Sekach, who was another jewel, just wonderful person to work with. She came in and sort of taught us how to sight read, and she'd bring in very modern scores which didn't have melodies but had percussive things and structures, and we had to learn to bang things and sing and hum. And it allowed us to elevate the language at a couple of points, I seem to think, in the end. And then Jane Gibson, who was the most wonderful teacher of period dance, who explained why dances were the way they were. She came in and I said, look, we've got all this rehearsal time. Why don't you take us from the earliest dances right through to the Elizabethans? So we had an education in period dance, from the farandole, which was a sort of early medieval dance where you danced in a line holding hands and you threaded through each other, to very sophisticated dances with very complex patterns. I remember there was a wonderful one called the Venetian, which with 3 people, and you performed like gondolas. You were sort of swaying, quite wonderful. We didn't know we were going to use dancers. It was just a sort of education. So, I mean, those were the days when you could, I don't know, you seem to be able to do these things. It would be considered a luxury now, but we did it. And we explored that play in great detail and divided the roles up, and we figured how people could double. And then we got to the final scene where everybody was playing 2 or 3 characters, and it worked. All I can say is it worked. Because the characters were very fully developed. It wasn't gimmicky. We weren't cute about it. That was the way we told the story. And we did announce each scene Rome or so forth. The play is divided into 3 worlds. The sort of ancient Britain world of Cymbeline, Renaissance Britain of Iachimo, and the Welsh mountains of whenever. And that's what's always been a criticism of all these disparate worlds, but they seem to blend wonderfully together. And to begin with, we thought, how can we physicalize all these things differently? So when we were doing sort of ancient Britain, everybody lived in sort of tunnels. So everybody would be crouching and coming out of things. And halfway through rehearsal, I said, this is a load of crap. We don't need this. It's just a waste of time and energy. So we just dropped all that. But at least we'd explored it. Anyway, so we did it, and it was a huge success. And it was a revelation. And also doing it very intimately was wonderful. And audience was absolutely riveted by it. And it was very, very special, I think. And a big release. So there we are. So that was.
I remember seeing it in Sheffield, and that last scene where these actors would suddenly just sort of turn on themselves and respond to something that the other character had played. It was like what we were saying about the children at the school. Do you remember how you were talking about that and the idea of just looking at something and then creating the whole world for yourself? I mean, that's what those actors were doing, so that one just sort of believed that there were 2 different people talking to each other.
Yes, I mean, we had done a little bit in the Arabian Nights, Rogues of Delilah. I remember Rad Rawi, who was in that company. He had to play a scene with himself as a caliph and a very abject citizen. So he had to stand up and then to prostrate himself on the floor and stand up and prostrate himself. But they were very physical. I mean, my God, people were in good nick then. They were amazing. And so we had that already as a sort of possibility, as a structure. Anyway, so these shows I can see now were feeding into each other in very subtle ways, which I didn't probably notice at the time. Yeah. So there we were. So that was more or less those 4 shows. It covered about 5 years because we'd done the Arabian Nights for over 18 months and we'd done endless variations on them and so forth. And I should tell you the names of the people who were in that company. Yeah. The very first one that we did at Sheffield, the very first version, it had a lot of people that I worked with at Lambda. There was John Dix, James Smith, Celia Gore-Booth, Veronica Roberts, and an actress called Diana Barrett, who I think had been at Lambda, but not with me, and a guy called Anthony Allen. There were 6. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we got our grant and we could go on for another year, only Celia wanted to stay. I told you. So there was a different group of people, which included Rad Rawi, Christian Burgess, Stephen Crossley, and Pam Ferris, and Celia. And we only had 5. We decided the women's roles were sufficient just for 2 people. So, and that's when we created the second and third and the children's stories with that group. So that had a life. And throughout that early period, actors would sort of come and go, as it were. John Dix was in the first model of Arabian Nights, didn't follow it through, but came back for Bleak House. Rad wasn't in Bleak House, but came back for science fictions and Cymbeline. And so that was, and Pam Blesser stayed on forever, which was wonderful, a gift. So that's the way things. James Smith came back for Bleak House, and then subsequently later, and so forth. So that was the first 5 years, and then I can't remember what my thinking was, but I did another Shakespeare. I did The Merchant of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
I had an idea about it, that the scenario and the characters were almost pure commedia. You had the upper class lovers, the Amorati, Portia and Benvolio? No, something like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I can look it up actually. My mouth will appear at my Bassanio. Okay. And then you had the sort of vulgar characters with Nerissa and Gratiano. Shylock was a Pantalone because Shylock is a miser with a daughter who he incarcerates, who runs away, breaks away from him. And you've got, Lancelot Gobbo, who's a sort of Arlecchino. So I thought, right, let's do that. So I thought, we're going to do Shakespeare masked like a commedia. Well, again, I was trying to deal with two totally different disciplines at the same time, the Shakespeare verse and the spontaneity of wearing masks. And we had a very long rehearsal period, I remember, for that as well. We had quite a lot of new people, including Philip Osmond, who was then an actor who subsequently became a wonderful writer, and with whom, we'll talk about that hopefully in the future, I had the most wonderful collaborative relationship as a director to a writer, one of my most fulfilling experiences working in theatre. But he was an actor, and he played Lancelot, Gobbo, and Antonio. And there was doubling, and they were masked. And it sort of worked and didn't work, and the reviews were a bit interesting. But then we were invited to a theatre festival in Toronto, and we took that and we revived with yet a new cast, the first Arabian Night, which was our sort of popularity card that we took with us. And somehow there, those two things suddenly coalesced. It was a question of time, and I was so relieved at the end because I thought, oh, it can work. Mm-hmm. It does work, the mass and the language. And what was interesting doing the Shakespeare, because we rehearsed for a long time and we really understood everything we were talking about, those actors knew the text backwards and forwards. And occasionally there would be some academic at an after-show discussion of either Cymbeline or Merchant of Venice, who would make statements, and the actors say, sorry, that's not quite right, that is not the quote is actually this. It was kind of impressive. But you see, the common denominator of all this is time. Time to explore, not to feel rushed, as long as you're not wasting your time and doing things just for the sake of doing them, but generally exploring, trying, testing, And then, of course, if you're working hard and you're developing skills, you do get results. So assuming you have a goal in mind and you have some sort of vision, which I did have. And with Merchant of Venice, I started to work more on large stages, end stages, okay?
Stop for a second. You froze for a second, so just go back. You were saying The Merchant of Venice what? Just now, just a second ago.
Oh, The Merchant of Venice was the first show in which we only played on main stages, proscenium arches and end stages. Most of the time before that, we played anywhere. And it just seemed right, and it also meant we could expand our touring. And it needed a bigger look somehow. And so there was an element of design, and there was a Polish designer called Wojtek, who did a lot of television at the time, lovely man. And it was very simple. What we did, we had some blue curtains hanging as a background, and the actors basically wore sort of leotards or something like that, but they had a whole series of capes, which were not for their characters, which were for the mood of the play. And so they were heavy or they were light. And at the end, when it's very playful, the last act of The Merchant is, the lovers reunited. We have these huge silk, capes which just flowed, and they ran around the stage, and it was beautiful. But again, it took a lot of technique to work with them and not slip on them and so forth. And I remember Shylock's cape was a little sort of black narrow thing with a little rat's tail at the back, but the capes were identifying the mood of where the play was rather than the characters. So, and the masks were designed.
Mm-hmm.
One called Jennifer Carey, I think, did that for us. And so we had a little, and everywhere, there were a lot of musicians in the company, so they played music where it was appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Not as decoration, but as plot. I think they played for the Three Princes.
Yeah.
And I think when Portia at the beginning is thinking about all the men she's possibly there, they were playing, a little bit. So we did have instruments on stage. So that was Merchant of Venice.
And I think that's the end of our next segment. And
okay.
We will reconvene in a minute.
Okay.
But yes, so we've got up to the Merchant of Venice, and then we'll move on.
I think it's Seagull next.
Okay. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.